So, how was your week other
My
than
week was
the incredible heat wave at the end of it?
yeah, it was good. Um, yeah, normal, normal.
Normal.
I finished the book the day of our last meeting, and since then I've just kind of been looking into what she mentions in the book.
Hmm.
And then I was going to ask you what you thought she left out. That way I can kind of add it to my list of things that she mentions.
Oh man, she left out like so much. Well, so here's a something that I can throw at you just at the very beginning here, because this was something that occurred to me as I was reading through the epilogue last week. And if you notice, only at the very end of the book does the author briefly reference, and very briefly, she references DARPA's work on brain implants to cure mental illness and
Yes.
the work that they were doing around that, right? And she also mentions the opening of the Biological Technologies Office
Hmm.
in 2014, which is very, very interesting because it coincides with the Brain Initiative that I stumbled
Oh,
upon this past week.
yes.
Um, but she says that they opened this office as part of a larger White House initiative in brain science, which obviously she's referencing the Brain Initiative without actually
Mhm.
ever calling it by name, which, I've pointed out several times she likes to do that. Um, she goes on to claim that this is going to build upon research that DARPA had sponsored since the 1960s. But she never really mentions that work that is being built upon anywhere in the book. So, like, what's the point of even mentioning it in the epilogue then, if you're not actually going to talk about it in the course
Mhm.
of, giving your official history
Mhm.
of the agency? Like, why even talk about it then?
Yeah, she really wants you to think of DARPA. And based on all the YouTube videos I've watched about DARPA as well, everybody wants you to think of DARPA as like this like again, it's where like it's this laboratory where all these crazy scientists and like young people have crazy ideas and they get funded and they see what works and they see what doesn't, and what doesn't work in a military context has applications in a commercial context, and it's making people's lives better and whatever. And I don't know, it just that doesn't seem right to me. Like today I was listening to this one about food and how DARPA would like to use military waste to generate food, like the microbes from military waste they want to turn into food for you to eat. And they said, well, our agricultural and food systems are developed for peacetime, and this isn't going to be, this isn't sustainable, right? We need to develop ways for you to eat while we're at war, and apparently that's by using military waste. Which, I mean, what is military waste? Does that mean like
I
shit?
mean, that's the thing. Well, that's the thing is they love using these terms that they never get around to defining, right? So
Mhm.
what in their mind when they're speaking the words military waste, they know exactly what they're talking about,
Mhm.
but they use this nebulous terminology so that instead of telling you directly what it is that they're going to be working with, which more than likely, if we knew what the individual components were that they want to then turn into stuff that people consume, we would be absolutely horrified
Mhm.
by what it was that they were trying to do. But simply by saying military waste and leaving it as this generalized term, they essentially leave it up to the listener to determine exactly what it is that are going to be like the building components
Mhm.
of this futuristic food that they're trying to create or whatever. And that allows for incorrect assumptions to be made, because again, like we've talked about before, after people go through the education system, um, they come out the other side of it with this notion, well, government is there to take care of us, so they're not going to do anything that's deliberately detrimental to the public's health, right? So it's just their way of being able to skirt around something that they know would be a huge scandal if they actually got called on the carpet about it.
Mm-hmm. We didn't really say what it was. You put that there. You injected whatever you injected into that word.
Right.
We meant this, which I'd really like to know what they mean, because it's pretty interesting. I want to know how you make food out of garbage, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and again, I don't want to speculate too terribly much and give them too much of the benefit of the doubt, but they could be trying to invoke ideas like composting, right? Where you take biological matter that you're not actively using as a foodstuff, right? Eggshells or rinds off of fruits and vegetables, those sorts of things. And you re-inject them back into the soil in order to get the nutrients back out of them into the soil so that you can then use it for growing future foodstuffs. They could potentially be talking about something like that. Now,
it's a revolutionary idea.
Right. But they could also be talking about things like using depleted uranium in munitions because it's more effective in piercing armor plating. Like that. That could also be considered military waste, that depleted uranium. So it's just the way that they go about using language to completely obscure exactly what it is that they're trying to do and leave it to the imagination of, the end user effectively, because that way they can pretty much get away with doing whatever the hell they want. And if you never find out about it, oh, well, they told you they were using military waste.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, and also, I mean, another thing too is that it kind of justifies the military's waste, right? They're like, well, we do something with it, so it doesn't really matter too much if we generate a lot of it, if we're like the biggest polluter on the planet.
Right. Well, and the other thing too is the military wastes billions of dollars every year. Are they going to start turning that into food? Yeah, probably not.
What concerns me the most about that and framing is that they are envisioning a future that is not peaceful.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's how they make money. That's how the military stays in business. I mean, that was pretty much the story of the 20th century. What is the
I think
the
what should
moniker that they always put on World War II?
What?
That it was the war to end all wars.
Oh.
Did it end all wars?
No, but it would have been nice.
Sure, it would have been nice, but that wasn't the point. That was just the marketing. That was the branding that was attached to it.
Yeah. I mean, what I think should happen is that the military gets paid while they're in peacetime. They do not get paid while they're at war. So that would give them the incentive to create peaceful situations. Because it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's like for doctors, I think it should be the same thing. I should pay you while I'm healthy. When I'm sick, then you need to fix that. Why should I pay you if I'm sick? That gives you the incentive to keep me healthy. It doesn't give you the incentive to prescribe me a bunch of shit medications that are just going to get me more sick.
Well, absolutely. And I'm not trying to argue against the concept at all. But to me, the notion of war is only possible because people invest their energy into the idea of scarcity. Um, they believe that they need somebody to protect their interests because somebody else is going to come in and take those interests from them, whatever they may be. Um, that's kind of how these people have managed to get such a stranglehold on power to begin with, is they have gotten people to buy into the idea that they need to be protected from other people, where the reality seems to be that the people we need to be protected against are the ones that are promising to protect us.
Hmm.
You know,
Well, they've
that's
gone much farther than just like a physical sort of protection too. It's like protection against ideology as
mhm.
well. I mean, I still struggle to understand, and I mean, again, I don't know a lot of things, but um, I can't understand why the U.S. was so fervent in their resistance to communism, in the sense, or in any other sense, that it was a threat to their like global domination. That's the only reason that I can glean from the situation, is that there was a movement sweeping across countries that was
Mhm.
generating a populace that was much bigger than the democratic countries, right? Or the countries under the crown.
Right.
Um, and that's why they wanted to stop it.
I don't know. Well, I guess I've spent a lot of time looking at that particular duality, because that's, when you boil it down, that's what it is communism and capitalism are essentially opposite sides of the same coin, except that, kind of applying the Zen or the Taoist philosophy of, all things being present in all things to some degree or another. Um, they do seem to be like the opposite poles of the political spectrum, right? Because capitalism is going to gravitate towards the uplifting of the individual, whereas communism is going to gravitate ultimately towards the uplifting of the collective. So, from an ideological standpoint, it makes perfect sense to me that those two ideologies would come into conflict with one another,
Mhm.
and thus with them being propagated throughout the various nations on the planet, that's where we get the surface level conflicts that occurred throughout the 20th century and then kind of spilled over into the 21st century. Because I think what happened is a lot of people started to, well, a lot of people who lived under communism understood that what they were being told the government was doing and what the government was actually doing were two completely different things. So those people knew that it was utter bullshit. And then the same thing was happening with capitalism. It was happening here in the United States, but more so like in the countries where they would go in and they would oust the democratically elected government and install a puppet government that was going to be favorable to the West and what the West wanted to accomplish in that territory. Um, the people living in those countries were seeing the same thing, that the government was saying one thing and actually doing something else. It really only seems that it was in the Western countries. And again, I could be completely wrong about this because I've spent the majority of my life in the United States. So I'm only looking at it from that perspective. But it seems like in the Western countries, like the United States, like Canada, like Britain, um, the public was very well deceived as to what the actual game was. In other words, if our government was actually legitimate at some point, there was a definite moment in time where that ceased to be, and this this Hegelian dynamic between capitalism and communism became the dominant force in geopolitics around the world. So at that point, you kind of get into a situation where, yeah, you can define it under these various terms, but the appearance and the reality bear absolutely no relation to one another whatsoever. And it really just, it boils down to a power struggle on a game board. It just one big global game of Risk, essentially.
Yeah, just unreality.
Yeah. But yet,
Yeah.
especially in like the United States and these countries, we, for whatever reason, we have large segments of the population that continue to hold on to this illusory narrative, that we live in a free country, that, one vote equals one voice, and yada, 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 so on and so forth. All these platitudes that, are drilled into our brains from birth. It's just the longer that I look at it, and especially, doing my best to be able to kind of disconnect myself from any sort of national identity, or even like a regional identity, or that sort of thing. Like, I just try to look at it from the standpoint of, I'm a human being living in the world, and I'm just trying to figure out what reality actually looks like. Just looking at it from a purely objective standpoint, it really just seems like more theater than anything else. Like, these are all just illusions that are put on the cave wall for us to be entertained by. And the people who are creating those shadows are the ones who are, profiting wildly from our belief in that illusion. It's again, it's a very radical worldview from what most people possess. But I'm having a hard time finding evidence to the contrary. That's the thing. It's like the longer I look into it, the more I'm like, oh, okay, well, this thing that I was taught was a lie, and that thing that I was taught was a lie, and oh, this is how this actually works. And oh, okay, so economics really doesn't have anything to do with money so much as like the flow of the money supply, of the currency itself. And just basically having to go through and relearn everything that I thought I knew about how the world worked has gotten me to this point where, I don't know, the world today, when I look at it, is completely unrecognizable from how I viewed it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, definitely 20 years ago, definitely when I was a child, because I went through the same thing everybody else did, where my parents would tell me, this is how the world works, and this is why you do this, and this is why you do that. And all of that stuff was garbage, but they didn't know any better at the time either. So it's just, it's this system that perpetuates itself over and over again across the generations. And you really have to put effort into disconnecting yourself from it in order to see what it actually looks like. And I think I got off on a little bit of a tangent there, but yeah, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy, because every day it seems like I'm learning something new that I should have known a long, long time ago. So I don't know, how did I even get off on this little diatribe?
I
got
don't
lost.
know. Well, we were talking about communism and capitalism.
That's right. Yeah, and the illusion of both.
And the war being essential to military.
Yeah. Well,
existence.
I mean, Smedley Butler talked about it in his book that he published. God, what was it, in the 1930s? I think it was. The title was "War is a Racket," and he's 100% correct. War is not about, trying to do the right thing. It's not about fighting evil.
Mm.
It's not about delivering freedom and democracy to oppressed peoples around the world. It's about making money,
Yep.
like plain and simple. That is all war is about, regardless of what the government tells you, regardless of what the media tells you. It is about making money. And there's also a byproduct to war that the people who control the strings of power in this world really, really like. And that byproduct is depopulation.
Are there any other countries that are constantly engaged in conflicts or wars like we are, or like the US is?
Um, Not to the extent that the United States is, to the best of my knowledge. I mean, obviously, during the or not 19, but the 20th century, the Soviet Union was running a close second. There were periods where the Chinese were also participating in the war racket as well. But none of those other countries really had the economic resources to draw upon like the United States did.
Hmm.
That was to me kind of the thing that set this country apart from everybody else, is the ability to generate and concentrate wealth in this country and then redistribute it through the various channels that would be capable of promoting war. That was a system that was unique to the United States in many, many ways.
Is that system capitalism or something different?
Um, I mean, there are, calling it capitalism again is also kind of a misnomer, because it's not capitalism as defined by Adam Smith. It's because it's not a free market, and to the best of my knowledge, it never really has been, at least not since 1913, when the Federal Reserve came into existence. It's from that point, definitely, and probably even before that, it was always a captured market.
Hmm.
And even though we have this notion that we call laissez-faire, where we rely on the invisible hand to move the markets, um, that invisible hand is not like some sort of otherworldly power. It's literally the people who control the banks are the ones who are directing the flows of the market. So they're going to send capital to the areas that they want it to go through,
Hmm.
or go to. They've just over time they've developed these incredibly complex systems in order to be able to feed that currency to their destinations and give the appearance that it's happening organically. Because when you really start studying the central bankers and looking at them throughout history, and especially the various generations of them, the one thing that you begin to realize is not only are they well educated in things like economics, they're also well educated in things like mechanical engineering. Like, take Klaus Schwab, for example. He has several different college degrees that he can lay claim to. One of those degrees that he has is in mechanical engineering, because when you get right down to it, the science of economics itself is just the study of energy as it moves through systems. Well, what are systems?
Mm.
Systems are complex machines. If you don't have knowledge of engineering, then you don't know how to build complex machines and make them
Hmm.
work.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Uh, yeah, I mean, to me, it sounds like war is one of the United States or the West's only tools of expansion, um, which is going to stop it from like rapidly decaying. So if you were
Hmm.
just to take war off the table, I think the Western civilization doesn't really have another foot to stand on. Um, at least that's what at least it's how I interpret it. But also that makes me think of all of the like venture capitalists or impact investing that we see in a lot of like technocrats and whatever. Just reminds me of those kinds of ventures and what they're putting their money into, which is like, again, it's these weird sort of artificial life projects. And yeah, that's mostly it from the civilian side, but obviously from the military side, they're trying to use that artificial life for killing, right? Artificial warriors and whatever.
Well, for domination, I mean, that's
right.
That seems to be the main goal of any military force, is the domination of the opponent, however that opponent is defined. So they're always going to be searching for newer and better technologies that help them to achieve that goal of dominance.
But dominance for its own sake, or dominance for like a purpose? Because
power, dominance is power,
right?
So it's power for power's sake.
It's just again, what do you get after you have? What do you get after you have one civilization's military dominating everybody else? What do you have? You just have control. That civilization.
Yeah, you have control.
You have control, but what I would imagine the case would be is that you have control for a very brief time, and then you have new civilizations like starting on the margins. Because, I mean, when you're talking about something like a whole globe and billions of people, it's not possible to really dominate that many people just with a singular force,
Well, correct. Which is why they have to do things like develop technologies in order to control people's choices, to control the flow of information, to control what people are allowed to know and what they're not allowed to know. Because again, if you can control the information that people use to make decisions, you effectively eliminate their free will.
All the information that you need to know has already been written down and is available in your public library.
For the most part, yeah. Except for when they go around burning the libraries.
Yeah, true. But I mean, it's just so silly. Do you have any friends that read books? Or do you know anybody who reads?
All right. So we're talking about like the people that I come into contact with, like physically out in the world, right?
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally.
So let's base it on my history. Because right now I'm more of a hermit than anything else. I try not to interact with the people around me. Because there's at this point, there's just no telling, where that interaction could lead. But the people that I have interacted with over the course of my life, there have been, I would say, a substantial amount of readers. Most definitely more who did not see a whole lot of value in reading a book. Maybe let's put it that way. So let's talk specifically about book readers, because again, the notion of being a reader or not being a reader in this particular moment in time, I think probably carries a little bit different connotation, because most of the things that we read on a daily basis, because again, you go through the American educational system, you're going to be taught how to read. Well, you're going to be taught how to read up to a certain level, right? You're not necessarily going to be taught things like comprehension or critical reading skills or those sorts of things. So that type of reading, I don't really put a whole lot of emphasis on, reading news websites, reading even newspapers and magazines at this point. I mean, it's all been so dumbed down. It's like, that's where you're putting your time. I don't consider you to be a reader. For the people that I have known who still read books, because again, that apparently seems to be an ever shrinking segment of the population as time goes by. I don't even consider a lot of those people to be readers. And the reason why is because of what they are reading. Most of them are spending their time reading fiction, right? Whether
Mm,
it's popular fiction, whether it's science fiction, whether it's even classical literature. Um, I don't consider personally, again, not saying that I haven't read my fair amount of fiction. I have, but I got to a point in my life, I would say probably somewhere in my early to mid 20s, where I just really wasn't getting anything out of fiction anymore. Like, I'd gone through some of the classics, I'd gone through some of the stuff that was popular at the time, Stephen King, Dean Koontz, Robin Cook, all that sort of things that, was like the 80s, 90s. Um, and it stopped appealing to me because I was like, it's not really adding anything valuable to my
mhm,
knowledge base. And that was kind of the point where I started getting more into nonfiction works like history, like philosophy, like theoretical science publications and those sorts of things. And that was really where I started finding the most value in what I was reading. Um, so yeah, for the people that I've encountered throughout the course of my life, I don't consider a lot of them to be readers, but that's because of how I define, what's valuable in reading.
mhm,
Um, and then also from the fact that I know that there's a lot of deliberate garbage that is published nowadays in order to occupy people's time so that they consume that material as opposed to going and looking for
mhm.
more valuable types of material. So yeah, if you're reading purely fiction, I don't consider you to be much of a reader at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely some more thought-provoking fiction works than others. Like those like dollar romance novels. Obviously, those are like burnable material, but um, things like I don't know, Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, it definitely has like some uh merit and I would say I would add that to my library. It's a good snapshot of like a certain period of time. But other than that, I mean, there's not too much to glean from it. But yeah, I would say I was the same way. I read a ton of fiction and fantasy when I was a kid. And then I got into philosophy in school. And then all I did was read nonfiction. And that was great. Like I learned a lot, but it also it comes with a steep learning curve how to read
Mm.
those things. So I think that's kind of why people don't approach them. You need um, some amount of conversation to like kind of really understand what's being said. Otherwise, you come up with this like if you are able to kind of get through it, you come up with this weird sort of typically people inject a lot of what they are looking for into a lot of it and then they come up
Mhm.
with this like perverted interpretation. um, so I think that's the reason. It's interesting to me to see kind of the a lot of the tools that people need to get through or past what they are being bombarded by and just sit there and not be used, although that was the life work of many great genius people,
Mhm.
is to get us past that. And yet we're just putting it on the side, and it could be of just enormous use right now. there's there's a lot like philosophy and ethics has been a dying um, field of study. uh, when I graduated from the philosophy department at my college, they got rid of the last scholarship, the school did, in
Oh
favor of
wow.
business scholarships. So I had received one of the last scholarships for that school. So I mean, what is it just, there's no incentive to study that stuff, but also it's not really something you can approach from like a layman. I mean, there are some philosophers that write stuff that's a little bit more digestible, but you're talking about this, like, Will and Ariel Durant's great books, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is the beginning, and is only one half of the picture of the dialectic that you need to understand it all. Right? If you get that plus like Eastern philosophy, I think you're really, really, really well armed to defend yourself intellectually. But if that isn't even something that you've heard of, if it's not something that you're interested in like even exploring on a surface level, like, it's just a shame.
Yeah.
It's there ready for people to utilize. And
Well,
it's
and
like, again, it's like reinventing the wheel every single time. Why? Why
yeah.
can't we apply the same like rigor and principles to our minds as we do to like technology, right? I don't know. It just makes me upset.
Well, it should make you upset because historically, in this country at least, and I believe in some of the other Western nations and even some of the non-Western nations around the world, the whole purpose of going to college in the first place was to get that exact type of education, that classical liberal education, where you were literally learning from the masters who had come before, right? But as the kind of the Industrial Revolution took over, and we began to put more of an emphasis on technology, and things like economics, generating wealth, and all of those sorts of things, that classical liberal education became de-emphasized at the institutions of higher learnings, because again, one of the things that was determined very, very early on was that in order to make this machine of capitalism go, you were going to need what would essentially be a managerial class of people that would be overseeing the inner workings of the machinery, essentially an intermediary between the people who created the machine and the people who are actually doing the work in the machine to generate the wealth, right? That managerial class is what essentially the universities were tasked with producing. So in order to create that product, the managerial class of humans, they had to remove parts of the curriculum. In other words, they literally had to stop teaching people how to think critically and figure out how to essentially condition people so that they would just be willing to receive instruction and then carry out their task. Like, it
Well,
literally
how can you call that how can you call that free market capitalism instead of like an oligarchy? It doesn't make any sense. Like, it's one thing pretending it's something else, like you said.
Correct.
It's
But
just,
the thing is, we have called it capitalism for so long at this point that I think it really doesn't even matter anymore what the original idea of capitalism was. This is what it's become. Just like I'm sure 100 years from now, when people are talking about transhumanism, it's they're while the notion may have originally begun as something that was going to be beneficial to our species and uplift us to whatever newer and greater heights of evolution or whatever garbage these people believe in, I can guarantee you that 100 years from now, that idea is going to be so incredibly perverted as to be unrecognizable when compared with whatever that original ideal was. But at the same time, I don't think, and obviously, this is a hypothetical situation, but 100 years from now, I don't think we should stop calling it transhumanism just because it now appears as something completely different. Like
Mhm.
this is what it started at, right? And this is the evolution of this idea that we can trace through time. You know, I don't see the need to call it something different just because it evolves into a different form than what it may have originally started at.
Mhm.
The people, again, the people who control this system want to call it capitalism. They want us to believe that it resembles this original ideal, which anybody who has a couple brain cells to rub together can realize that it doesn't. The two look nothing like one another, but yet this is what we're supposed to call it. Okay, well, this is what we're going to call it. So to me, that just
Yeah.
means that we now need another idea to replace this thing that we're now calling capitalism that ultimately failed because it was, corrupted.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's definitely become less of an economic system and more of a like a I don't know, organizing principle for civilization. A lot like how, I mean, a lot, that's a lot like how, in my understanding, how the communist movement was too. It wasn't just like a
Mm-hmm.
economic principle. It was more of a, a holistic view of how society should be, which I don't know. I don't know why that rubs me the wrong way.
Well, I think part of it comes from the fact that if you are approaching things from a standpoint of logic and reason, one of the primary foundations that you are always going to fall back on is the ability to define your terms, right? Because if we can't agree upon the definition of words, then essentially we can't employ logic to understand anything about the nature of the world that we live in. Because though we may be using the same words, they mean two completely different things. So their logic cannot
Mm,
exist in that space. But of course, kind of the point that I'm trying to make is that, you know, even though the redefinition of language is used against us, pretty much as often as is necessary, I think there are specific moments where we need to understand that some words do need to be redefined because, again, they bear no likeness to the meaning that is supposed to be conveyed through their use.
mhm.
Again, we know that capitalism is supposed to look a certain way. The way it has always been practiced in our world does not look that way, but we still call it capitalism. So I'm okay
Mhm.
with calling that perverted idea capitalism and saying, all right, this original idea that we started with, let's maybe think of calling it something else and see, if maybe we can try to get it going again. Because this thing that we call capitalism is not that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, well, like you said, I think the agreement upon definition of words is really important, and I think there's been a lot of attempts to break that down. I, I'm yeah. If you are saying something, and I am saying something, and we mean two different things, then you walk away with the understanding that I've said something I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's the whole goal. And whatever I've said, it doesn't matter what I meant. It matters what your reality is. Your reality will be whatever it is, regardless of what I meant. Right. So I think it's important. It's definitely not useful to do it on like sort of an atomic level. Like there's definitely a thick layer of words that have kind of well-defined meanings, but it's not, I don't think it's out of the scope of normal cultural events to come to grips with what a word actually means, and perhaps change that definition a bit. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think there's something wrong with that if it's done with ulterior motives. Obviously, if you're seeking a definition for the sake of understanding a literal communication, like what the purpose of communication is, then you're going to arrive at a definition that works. But if you're looking for something to fit some other purpose, then you're probably going to come up with something more perverted.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So what sort of interesting things did you find in your research this week?
Sorry, what did you say? It's my internet's being crappy.
Gotcha. I said, what sort of interesting things did you find?
Not working at all.
Oh, fun.
Oh yeah, it's just being a little spotty, so just bear with me. I looked into some of the early mentions of, so I'm looking into projects, people, and I don't know, I guess places. So I was looking into the Psychological Strategy Board a lot, and that was one of the leaders of that board was Alan Dulles, who was the director of the CIA. And this was, I'm not sure. I had just learned that the CIA was established under the National Security. What is it called? National Security
Act of 1947. Isn't that it? I can hear you clicking.
This is fun.
You must have one of those fun internet connections like I do, where just when you're about to get to the point you want to make, it decides to crap out on you, which I blame on the NSA, but that's just me. Uh-oh. I think maybe the NSA is not happy with us because now I can't even hear clicking. And it looks like Maddie's picture is frozen. Yep, just dropped out. So we'll see if she comes back here in a moment. But I believe that was the what created the CIA, the National Security Act of 1947. If I'm not mistaken, and if I am mistaken, somebody can definitely drop a comment and let me know, because I like getting the fact checks. All right. And we were just about to get to the good stuff too, man. That's what sucks about this. So let's see. What did I find? I was looking into the Information Awareness Office at DARPA because I was cursorily familiar with them, but I did not know a whole lot about them. And I'll tell you, for folks who want to learn more about the Information Awareness Office, which was established January of 2002, as well as the Total Information Awareness Program. Let's see, Maddie just sent me a message here. Anyway, anyone who wants to know more about the Total Information Awareness Program can head on over to the Book of Knowledge. the venerable Wikipedia. And there is actually a copious amount of the total information awareness program that is available there, not just your bland vanilla history on what was one of the most unpopular programs of the early 2000s, apparently as according to Congress. But you can check out all of the different things that they were getting their hands into, which apparently ended up going black, and then to the NSA, to the CIA, various other agencies. So the program itself did not actually end. It's just Congress got up in arms about it, and they decided, oh, okay, well, we need to chop it up now and feed it to the various black budget agencies so that we can continue working on all this stuff. Are you back, Maddie? Maybe. Yes, no. I can't hear you. Are you muted? Doesn't look like you're muted.
My mic was muted, I think. Okay,
cool.
now. Okay.
I was just filling people in on total information awareness, and the fact that you can still go to Wikipedia and find out a lot about that program.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of information on the Wikipedia page. So glad you're back. What did you find?
So I was looking into the Psychological Strategy Board, and their stated mission was to create propaganda, both for foreign actors and domestic civilians. So they were looking for ways to get people to kind of go along with the war, Cold War, and try to develop sentiments in favor of the war, against communism, and etc. So it didn't seem like their program lasted for a long time, but like our author mentions, the best way to kill a program is just to rename it, and then rename it again, and then kill it. So I assume that this just turned into something else. And it was a CIA program. Well, no, it wasn't. It was an interdepartmental program between, it was the CIA, I believe the Defense Department, and somebody else. I'm trying to pull up the CIA's white paper on it, but it is not coming up. It's loaded like 80%, and it just refuses to load any further. But
they know you're trying to pull it up. That's what it is.
Yep.
She's on a Zoom call and she's trying to access documents.
Yeah, but it didn't. It's everything that you would expect. Just the research into behavioral science and psychology is a very old one, and it's one that, if you have people working on it, you can become very good at it with this amount of time allotted to it, over 70 years of research. So you have to operate in the world with the understanding that those kinds of tools and weapons are being used against you. And as long as you understand that, you can be on the lookout. Because democracy works because so long as half of the population or more agree with what's happening, it can go on. Mm-hmm. That's the way it's supposed to work, right? And that is why people like our dear leaders and the crown really love democracy, is because they figured out a way to have that happen. They figured out ways to create a majority and for whatever they'd like to have happen. And then it is under the guise that, oh, well, it's the will of the people, right? But if the will of the people is being led or prod it along. Is that really the case? So I think that's what they were aiming to do with the psychological strategy board. And then I also looked into the technological capabilities panel, which I found interesting. We'll see if that page loads. What I would take from that is basically they were looking for ways, they were trying to anticipate how they might be at a disadvantage or an advantage with the Soviets. It's a very old program, and I don't think it really has any sort of relevance nowadays. But it does speak to kind of what DARPA does in general, which is like try to get ahead of whatever technological capabilities any other person might have. Now we have the Defense Threat Initiative, which I'm pretty sure it is an offshoot of at least a couple of these programs. And they are looking into, chemical, biological, nuclear weapons, creating those in order to purportedly have a defense against them, and not be surprised by those attacks. And now they're really concentrating on chemical and biological weapons, which is what I was looking into yesterday a lot of. And what I found there was that, where the Defense Threat Initiative program gets its project impetuses, or where the sort of the genesis of its programs comes from, is the Defense Department, who identifies certain threats, right, and asks for medical countermeasures to be created against those threats. And monkeypox and smallpox and anthrax are really like a lot of where they're looking into, but particularly monkeypox was identified as a threat in 2019, and they subsequently developed a medical countermeasure against that by, I think it was like Novartis or some company named like that. But they do have a vaccine for that, that was given priority review voucher by the FDA. It's just like a lot of, and this is where the 21st Century Cures Acts come in. It's because a lot of these programs interact with one another, and they're only able to function to achieve these sorts of things if there is a pathway through all of the like bureaucratic and regulatory frameworks. And the 21st Century Cures Act has kind of, what it did was it opened a bunch of gates that were closed previously, so that those things could pass through them more quickly, and with less cash. So that's what happened with the monkeypox vaccine, which is very quite relevant today.
Interesting. It's so this, from what you found, the vaccine was developed specifically for monkeypox?
That's correct.
And that's what do they call it? Like Jynneos or something like that?
Jynneos, yeah. Yeah, it was one of the only, because this priority review voucher system is pretty new. It's one of there's only several medical drugs or devices that have been given the voucher, which the two of them were, well, three of them had to do with COVID. So there was remdesivir was one of them, and then Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines were as well.
Interesting. Well, the reason that I was asking about the monkeypox vaccine is, again, I haven't been paying nearly as much attention to the media as I had in the past, but the little bit that I had been checking in on the monkeypox situation, everything that I was hearing was saying that there was no specific vaccine for monkeypox, that what was available, and they actually referenced this pharmaceutical product by name, was actually for other animal poxes, like bovine smallpox and all of that sort of stuff. They were indicating that it was not developed specifically to counteract monkeypox.
Hmm. That's interesting because
Isn't it?
that's not what their documents literally say.
Wow.
On the FDA Priority Review Voucher website, you will see it say the name of the product and then its use, or like what the threat that is meant to counter, and it says smallpox slash monkeypox. So that's just not true.
Hmm.
And
Interesting.
same goes for the Defense Threat Initiative page. Let me pull that up really quick just to make sure, because I don't want to be wrong. Let's see. Okay, there's Jynneos. Yeah, proper name, smallpox and monkeypox vaccine, live, non-replicating. Jynneos, manufacturer Bavarian Nordic. Jynneos is a vaccine indicated for prevention of smallpox and monkeypox disease in adults 18 years of age or older determined to be at high risk for smallpox or monkeypox infection. That's from the FDA.
Hmm.
So weird.
Yeah. I mean, now it sounds like all they need is, like a massive outbreak of monkeypox so they can start selling and distributing this stuff.
Yeah, and I know I didn't look into the study protocols or anything. What they're doing, in my opinion, is they are generating scenarios in which they can test their products using the new clinical trial formats, which are like real world on the ground scenarios, right? So
Hmm.
typically they're trying to do away with the gold standard randomized clinical trial model, which you saw happen in COVID. Although they did like a simulacrum of a randomized clinical trial for both the Pfizer and Moderna shots. But what I think is being done is the justification of sort of universalizing medical data and using that data to institute real world trials where they give people this vaccine or this drug or this intervention and they figure out what works by using literal people and their
Hmm.
electronic health records, their mobile data, social networks, anything, literally anything and everything that they can get their hands on in terms of data. They'll feed that to an algorithm and say, well, we're not looking at it, it's the computer looking at it, so we're not looking at it, so your data is private still. But and so long as there's not a severe risk to you and your health in doing so, we don't even have to tell you. We don't have to tell you that you're part of
Hmm.
a trial.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense, considering what other friends of mine who work in the healthcare industry right now have been telling me in terms of things like data administration and what's going on there. Because there's a process that is happening right now as we speak, that is effectively unsiloing patient data records between various systems interfaces. In other words, like say for example, you would go to your family doctor or your primary care doctor or whatever the hell they're calling it these days. In the past, that physician was not able to access the records from, let's say, the local hospital from 6 weeks ago when you had to go to the emergency room for whatever reason, right? Well, now they're putting systems in place so that the whatever that local doctor's office uses for keeping their records and whatever the hospital uses for keeping their records, those two systems can now cross pollinate with one another.
Yep.
And the only thing that is actually needed is the just the initial visit for care. You know,
Yep.
you sign off on that HIPAA authorization form when you first get into the office, and now they can literally go and retrieve anything that they want from your medical history.
Yeah, and what is really crucial in this actually being an actual actionable framework for pharmaceutical and medical devices is that the data need to be formatted the same. Because if you have two systems that can't talk to each other, it's hard to identify what data is real or what the quality of the data is, because you're not sure if anything got lost in translation, which is in as far as I can tell, the reason for the big push in, I don't know, vax passports or like medical digitization of the self, right?
Well, so yeah, think about this, because the whole idea of the vaccine passports was it was a secure place where you could keep your digital records, as far as, you know, what shots you'd gotten, how many you'd had, if you were up to date, yada yada yada, so on and so forth, all the little details that people would rather argue about than the actual concept itself. But where are you going to keep it, right? Because it's digital, it's not physical, so it's literally like in the ether. Well, oh, we'll keep it on your phone. By the way, don't worry about the fact that your phone has this unique digital ID signature as
you
well.
got
So
it.
when they actually go and pull up those records through that QR code, they can just grab that digital ID signature from your phone, and now they know, you know, whose device it is. They can access all of your carrier data history, so on and so forth.
They would love to know every single thing that you post on social media as well.
Oh yeah.
Your
Well, I
the
mean, that's available
emails you're
through your phone
sending,
too.
the texts you're sending, if you're complaining about your health, you know, whatever, just they want any and all data they can gather, wearable devices, and putting your digital ID on your phone is a very important part of it. And just so you know, the one of the one of the institutions that our beloved FDA commissioner created in his long history is called Duke Forge, which is at Duke University. And their mission is to free the data to enable actionable insights and measurements that will guide implementation efforts across health systems. Okay, so this isn't, and this is another decades old program that's been in the works. Duke's has, just so you know, Duke University and these kinds of missions, along with their real world evidence generation programs, their clinical trial transformation project, is one of the top 10 most funded programs, and that money comes from the NIH. So it's, the government is very interested in stuff like this.
Oh yeah. Well, and I think another sync to point out here is that Duke University, and especially the medical system at Duke University, has always shared a very close relationship with Johns Hopkins University as well. Like the two are almost always inextricably linked to one another. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I read something about Johns Hopkins while I was doing my research. Let's see.
He was a slave owner that hasn't been called for cancellation yet, which is really super interesting to me, but I digress.
Oh, it was Transit, the satellite navigation project, where they send up a bunch of satellites in order to spy. That was in part done with the help of John Hopkins.
Hmm. Why does that
Oh,
not
and did you,
surprise me?
I don't know. I shouldn't. And just so this is a cute little nugget I found too was so Argus, which is the ARPA order for where they sent they were blowing up nukes underground to see if they could be detected, right? Or
Mhm.
I'm working on like a test detection system. That was named after a Greek hero,
Mhm.
Argos, who was a watchman in Greek mythology who had 100 eyes.
Mhm.
So there's just a lot of these like cute
Well,
names they give to things that don't mean anything unless you know about them.
correct. Because you remember the council of scientists that were put together, referred to as the Jasons.
Yeah, Jason and the Argonauts.
There you go.
Yeah. Uh, is Argos and the Argonauts like are those two things related?
Yes.
Okay.
Uh, don't ask me to explain how at the moment, but I know for a fact that they are because Greek and Roman mythology was one of my favorite subjects growing up, and
Mm.
there was a time where I could tell you literally everything you never wanted to know about it, but that time has passed.
Mm. Hey, that happens.
Yeah.
It's in there somewhere. You just got to familiar. It's like a platonic, this is what I think he really meant when he's talking about his theory of like where knowledge comes from, which
Hmm.
he thought it was like remembrance of things that you used to know. I think that's just kind of what he meant is like you learn things and then you forget them and then you remember them,
Hmm.
right? I don't think it's just like some divine source that you're learning from, but whatever,
Well, you know,
tangential.
yeah, and I don't necessarily disagree with Plato on that, but I think there is I don't know if you want to call it spiritual or divine or just otherworldly meta type connection that happens as well. You know, it can be demonstrated that we are connected to the universe around us in ways that we can't perceive with our five
Hmm.
senses.
Yeah.
um, and I think there is something to the fact that knowledge is not always something you can physically point to. Sometimes it can come to you through things like divine inspiration, where you can't really identify what the source is, but you just kind of you have the sense that it's more accurate than it isn't.
Hmm.
So, all right, let me see. Because we're getting close to being way past my lunchtime here. Um, do we want to try and do this again next week?
Sure. Uh,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, do you want to set a set a topic or just kind of
Um,
whatever?
now let's go just kind of free form.